Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. You know, every week I say I've got another great guest, and it's true this week. In fact, he's so great, I invited him back again. I don't know, is this your second or third time, Nick?
Third
time. Okay, well, we'll have to shoot for number 4 and 5 eventually down the road. With me today is Nick Gaylord. Hey, Nick, great to see you again.
So good to see you again, Kathy. How have you been?
Pretty good, thanks. Nick and I decided it's time to catch up. So we're going to offer just a little different perspective this time. We're going to kind of have not a review, but maybe some reminiscing about some of the guests that we have interviewed on our podcast. Nick has one, and he's going to tell you about it in a minute. And we're just going to share some information back and forth. So to get us started, Nick, would you kind of tell the listeners, because I know there's listeners out there that haven't heard your other episodes. Would you just start out by telling them a little bit about yourself and what your podcast is all about?
Absolutely. And let me just say thank you again so much for having me back again. And I would love to have a 4th and 5th time, and as many times as we do this, as many times as you want to do this. I love being on this show. It's an incredible podcast, and I hope that your listeners see as much value in it as I do.
Oh.
So thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. As you said, my name is Nick Gaylord. I'm the host of a podcast called Our Dead Dads, which is an unusual name. Everybody would agree to that part. The podcast is about grief, trauma, loss, processing everything, having the difficult conversations around processing grief and finding ways to move forward from all of it and finding ways to do it together as a community. One of the biggest things with this podcast is it's not just a podcast. It's about creating community. Everybody has been through grief, whether we'll admit it or not, or whether we want to talk about it. We have all been through the ringer in one way or another, or sometimes in multiple. Whether or not we choose to discuss it and open up about it is usually a different story. Unfortunately, most of us are, whether it's unwilling or just reluctant to open up about it because society has taught us for far too long that we just don't. We just shouldn't. I know that's the way it was with when I was growing up. Society, not only society, but the people in my life, the people who raised me, and I don't say that like they were wolves or something, like, my family, the adults in my life. Yeah, I was not raised by wolves, even though it looks like I may because I haven't shaved in a week or so, but it's okay. Yeah, I was born in 1975, so basically growing up as an 80s kid. Back then, the outlook on grief was, we don't talk about this. Mm-hmm. It's just a taboo topic. Mm-hmm. It always has been, and in a lot of ways, in a lot of circles of society, it still is. It's gotten better, but it still is hard to discuss. And a lot of people in my life said, we don't talk about this. Some people even suggested, leave this stuff for the women. I don't know why. That's just the way the mentality.
Women are known to be more touchy-feely types.
Yeah, exactly. Women are in touch with their emotions, and women can handle this, and they just deal with this, right? Well, okay. So, and then what about men? Where does that leave men who don't want to deal with it? Well, it leaves us in places like I found myself 4 years ago when my dad died. My dad and I did not have the greatest relationship. I am the oldest of his 7 children. He was married and divorced 5 times. And it was a very complicated relationship. Anybody who's going to be married and divorced 5 times, they're going to be a complicated individual.
Right.
He died in 2021, and I found myself about 4 months after that, at first thinking I was fine and then realizing I wasn't. And I found myself in therapy because my wife is the one who pointed out to me that I really needed to talk to somebody because I was losing all kind of control. I was getting angry. I was snapping at people for no reason. Nobody did anything wrong. Mm-hmm. It just, I couldn't deal with the internal crap that I had going on. Right. I didn't know how to communicate. My family was not the best at communicating. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't know how to handle it, as a lot of people don't. Unless you're working in the field, unless you know all these things or you've read a million grief books, then you don't know how to deal with this.
Right.
And so she said, you need to talk to somebody. And she was right. And so I did, found myself in therapy, and we did that for 6 months. And on the other side of it, I found peace. I found forgiveness toward myself and toward my dad. I was able to forgive him for being the person he was, for not being the person that we all know he could and should have been.
Right.
I was able to forgive myself for the anger, and I was finally able to let go of the anger. And that's something that I would not have found without therapy.
Right.
Now, also, a lot of people think, oh, therapy is not for me. It's a bunch of crap. Therapy is for everybody. Everybody should be in therapy at one point or another for something. So, but also a lot of people can't afford therapy. A lot of people may not have insurance. A lot of people don't know where to begin with therapy. So I created a podcast, and it is a platform that is open to everybody. As I've said many times from the beginning of the show up till recently, I do not ask you for your insurance card. I do not ask you for a copay. I ask you for some of your time and your willingness to just come in with an open mind, because there's a lot that can be learned here. I am learning things every single week. Definitely. Every conversation that I have, everybody that I talk to, I am constantly learning things. And I believe that we should all be open to learning things every day. If you live a day without learning something, you've basically wasted it. There's always something to learn. And so I started this podcast to just build community, to give people a platform and an opportunity, if they so choose to embrace it, to talk about some of the hardest things that they've been through in their life, to talk about grief, to talk about trauma, to talk about the loss they've experienced. And it's not, I know that the podcast name is called Our Dead Dads. I'm not going to get into a lot of details other than to say, find my podcast on all the major streaming platforms, and please listen to episode 1. I will talk all about how I got here, why I started a podcast, and why it's called Our Dead Dads. It involves my 3 younger brothers and 3 very close friends. I hope it's a good story. The interviews, I think, are better.
I think it's a good story. And,
it's a good story. It's a good story.
So many times we just try to find a title that will pique somebody's curiosity, that will make them want to take a listen. Just like with As I Live in Grief, I struggled for days and days and days over what to name the podcast. And I got so frustrated one day, I sat there and said, oh my goodness, as I live and breathe, why can't I think of this? And then boom, the light bulb went on.
Yeah.
Instead of As I Live and Breathe, it's As I Live and Grieve.
Yeah. Well, so my brothers and my friends and I, we're something that I can thank my dad for, is I'm fluent in sarcasm and dark humor. And we all are. And the 7 of us have always been a tight group. And we realized at some point, all of our dads are dead. So that kind of became like a joke between us, our dead dads.
Right.
But again, people just, we joke and we find dark humor, and it's a coping mechanism. And sometimes it's a great way to cope with something.
Yeah, it can be a stress reliever. It really can.
Yeah, it can be a stress reliever. And again, we're just 7 demented idiots. So, but it worked for us. And
that'd be a good title, 7 Demented Idiots. Never mind.
Maybe if I ever rebrand the podcast, then I'll get a picture of the 7 of us looking like and just like weird faces, and maybe that'll be the rebranding. Not anytime soon. But so I started the podcast, and like I said, there's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of humor, but there's also a lot of serious stories. There's a lot of conversation around really serious, really heavy, really intense topics. Some episodes did not have a lot of laughing at all because of what we're talking about. It is what it is. And so, it all depends on the story, and it's okay. Yeah. But it's all about, it's not a comparison. One of my guests, Jessica Prenti from episode 16, she famously for the podcast said, grief is not a pissing contest. Trauma is not a pissing contest. And she nailed it. It's not a pissing contest. It's not a comparison. It's not yours is worse than mine. It's we all dealt with it. We're all here. Let's work together. If we're going to be, if we're going to jump off the cliff into the abyss, then let's all hold hands on the way down. Yeah. Because we can do this together.
Tell me, out of all your guests, I don't know, how many episodes do you have out there now about?
Well, next week is going to be episode 50, and it's a pretty big one.
All right. So compared to me, you're a little newer. But that's true. I mean, even if you look at us, you're definitely younger than I am. I could be your mom, I think. But
you're one.
Yeah, I probably could. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, moving on. So out of all your episodes, tell me something you've learned from one of your guests.
From one of my guests?
Yeah. Or 2.
Well, I don't know if now you put me on the spot. I don't know if I can narrow it down to
or maybe a different perspective, or just something kind of stands out to you.
Something that I have learned is we all grieve and we all need to grieve.
Right.
We can't hide it. We can't bury it. We can't run from it. We can't escape it. We can't outrun it. We can't forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to be there. No matter how hard you try to push it down and bury it, you can try to drink it away. You can try to work it away. You can try to literally outrun it. I had a guest who talked about after she lost her dad, she was a runner. She was a marathoner. She became an ultra marathoner, literally tried to outrun her grief and ended up, did like a 200-mile 4-day ultra marathon around Lake Tahoe.
Gosh.
Ended up getting injured on day 4, and she was like 12 miles away from completing. She didn't get to finish it. And so she's injured and she's got that to deal with, and her dad's dead and she hasn't dealt with her grief. It's always going to be there. That's something that has been a very common theme throughout all the interviews, and everybody's perspective is different, and everybody's perspective is right. And I'm not trying to say that this isn't like a the customer's always right kind of situation with a supermarket, because that's a bunch of crap. We all know that. But when it comes to grief, the way you feel it's relevant, it's important, and it's important to be noticed and understood and validated. Nobody gets to tell you when you're dealing with your grief, oh, you're dealing with this the wrong way. Like there might be better ways of processing it. But if you're sad, if you're upset, if you're heartbroken, and it's been 6 months, it's been a year, and your people are telling you, you need to get over it. You need to get your life together and you need to pick up the pieces. That's not a person that you want to be giving you advice.
Right.
And I understand that they might be trying to, in their mind, help you. But a lot of times what it is that person who's saying those kind of things to you, they're uncomfortable with what you're going through and they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
Now, obviously, nobody wants to live the rest of their life in grief. Sometimes it happens, though. And rather than throw these labels on it and just put depression or manic or whatever, PTSD, let's try to dig a little bit deeper. And it's a two-way street. Like there need to be more resources readily available for people who want them. And there also needs to be the willingness from the person who's grieving to begin the process. Right. There are so many resources. There's resources galore from all the guests that I've spoken with. I've spoken with therapists, life coaches, teachers, friends, so many people from all walks of life. And at this point, I think I've interviewed people in 7 different countries, including ours, of course. And it's the same everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not different in England or in Australia or New Zealand. It's all the same. The human emotion is, we're all human. Right. So like in order for it to be something different, it would have to be a different species. And we are all human. We all experience the same thing. So that's kind of a perspective that I've gained that is, it's so important that everybody takes the time and has their grief validated and doesn't let themselves be surrounded by people who aren't interested in helping, by people who are just so uncomfortable with what they're going through that they're going to try to give them a false perspective. Like, deal with the hard stuff. Say the hard things. Say the uncomfortable.
Yeah. I like that. And I especially like when you first started out saying that grief is something we have to go through. It's, just like a caterpillar at some point has to make a cocoon and metamorphosize, change
you're great.
into a butterfly. The same way. That's a biological necessity. And I really believe for us, we have to go through it. It's physically, mentally, and emotionally necessary for us to go through the process of grief. And if we can set our mind and open our minds and let it happen, however long it's going to take for us, because we're all different, you get to the other side and things do get better. Because you've put the hard work in. You've gone through it. Through it.
Just don't beat yourself up.
Right.
Because of how upset you are, how sad you are, how depressed you are.
No.
That's part of the human emotion spectrum.
Yep.
But there are ways to get through it.
Right.
And grief really does suck.
Right.
We're not going to try to sugarcoat it here. Grief sucks.
Right.
Hard.
And I'll bet if you asked, the man on the street type thing, if you went out and said, what's the most powerful emotion, the deepest, most passionate emotion, they would say love. That's why grief hurts so much.
Yeah.
Because we love the person we've lost It's that same deep passion of love.
Yeah.
That's part of grief.
And it also could be someone that you couldn't stand. I mean, like me and my dad, I loved him. He was my dad, but he was a son of a bitch.
Right.
He was just a miserable person for most of his life.
Right.
Doesn't mean I didn't love him, but at the same time, I mean, holy hell.
Yeah.
It was not easy living with that.
You were grieving all of your life, really, but because you were grieving for the father that you wish you had, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
The
father I wish I had. Yeah, I mean, again, that's a lot of that is covered in episode 1, too. There are so many issues between us that I got
hard.
into.
But you do grieve a person. I mean, there are people, one particular that I wish dead. If murder had not been illegal, I probably would have helped him. Okay. But did I still love him at the time? Yes, I did. I afterward, after we divorced, after we went our separate ways, did I love him then? No. I loved the life I wanted to have with him.
That's right.
And I was grieving that probably more than anything.
Loss.
Yeah.
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 And loss is everywhere.
Sure it is.
And it's going to, in some ways, control our life. It doesn't have to completely control our lives. And like I said, we're not just talking about dad stories on this show. We've talked about parents, siblings, children, jobs, homes.
Yeah. Sometimes it's funny what comes up.
Marriages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because all loss needs to be grieved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have you ever had an episode that started out one way and then kind of took an entirely different direction and you went with it?
I'm sure there probably have been one or two.
Okay. All right. So tell me about an episode maybe that was your favorite. I know we were talking for a few minutes before I hit the record button, and you were telling me about a very special one. Tell everybody about that.
So, of course, if I say it's my favorite, then all my other guests are going to be like, what?
No. I mean, it's just like your children.
Right.
Exactly. You love them all.
Yeah, you love them all. And then somewhere on the side, they're like, it's okay.
But I do have one episode of mine that I do not like, but it's still there.
Exactly. Still there. So the one episode that you're talking about was, I mean, there are two that really stick out in my mind as just so incredibly impactful, and possibly it's because of the story that's involved, and also because both of them are they're very public cases.
Okay.
These are stories that a lot of people are familiar with. The first one was interviewing the parents of Gabby Petito.
Hey.
Many people remember Gabby and her then fiance, Brian Laundrie, set off on a cross-country trip in their van, and a few months later, Brian returned home without Gabby. It was discovered that he ended her life, and then he took his own shortly after. By the time they found him, or by the time they were even able to charge him with anything, he was probably already no longer on this earth. And so I got to interview her mom, Nikki Schmidt, and her bonus dad, Jim Schmidt. And that was such an intense interview and so powerful. And that was actually aside from my wife, Kim, that was actually my first in-person interview. As most of my guests know, I live in Tampa, and they kind of live on the other side of Tampa. They're probably maybe 45 minutes away. And she actually suggested it. Like, absolutely.
Nice.
So we did that and have gotten to know them and become friends with them. And they're just incredible people. And I actually have a charity golf event coming up on June 6th that I'm going back up to New York, because we were all originally from Long Island. And they're doing the second annual Gabby Petito Foundation golf event at, where is it? I think it's Willow Creek Country Club in Mount Sinai, New York. If anybody's interested, go to gabbypetitofoundation.org and look under the events, and you will see it. I believe there are still a few tickets left if you want to play golf. Is it okay if I give a little bit of information about it real quick?
Sure.
Okay, so if anybody wants to play as a single person, I think it's $325. As a foursome is $1,200. If you want to go just for dinner, I think it's $135. It's all for the foundation. It's an incredible cause. All the work that Gabby's parents, and by the way, when I say Gabby's parents, I mean all four of them: her mom, her dad, her bonus dad, her bonus mom. All four of them. They were a huge part of her life, and so the four of them are on the board. They run this foundation together. So yeah, that's going to be golf. It's going to be dinner. It's going to be an incredible day on Long Island. And I will be broadcasting live that morning, probably from like 9 to 11 a.m. So if anybody wants to come and hear me, find me on Facebook. I will be broadcasting live on Facebook, and just look under Nick Gaylord or Our Dead Dads Podcast. And yeah, so that's going to be an incredible day. I can't wait. And so happy that I even got to know them and interview them.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
Yeah. The second interview, which has probably had one of the biggest impacts on me personally, is a man by the name of Robbie Parker, who is one of the many parents who lost his child at the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in December of 2012.
Right.
That interview was gut-wrenching, and not talking to Robbie. Talking to Robbie was just brilliant. And Robbie is himself an incredible speaker, and he's just such a great human being. And the things that he went through, because unfortunately, he wasn't, as of losing his daughter wasn't bad enough. He then found himself in the crosshairs of one Alex Jones, who decided to throw all the conspiracy theories out there about how the shooting never happened. It was fake. It was staged. Robbie was a crisis actor, the whole deal. That went on for years before they ended up taking Alex Jones to court. And you guys can read the book and find out how that ended. It did not end well for Alex Jones.
Yeah.
So that interview and the Petitos, or the Schmidts rather, because Nikki got married to Jim Schmidt, her stepdad, but Gabby's parents. Those two interviews are probably two of my most intense. And I mean, if I had, I don't really want to put favorites on them, but I mean, I loved those interviews so much, as I love with all of my guests. Everybody just brings so much to the table.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, I wouldn't have a podcast if it wasn't for each and every one of my guests and my listeners, because I will say it until I drop dead. I don't know who the hell wants to listen to me talk just endlessly. But when we're talking about topics like this that impact literally every single one of us, it's not a sexy topic. This isn't a topic like some of the other popular topics or the hot button topics like politics or religion or sports
or scandals.
Or scandal.
Yeah.
Scandal, true crime, things like that.
Right.
That everybody, I mean, if I started a true crime podcast, if I really got it going, I could probably have 100,000 listeners in like 3 months, because everybody just loves true crime and scandal, all those things. This is not the same. People, I don't have 100,000 listeners and followers at this point, and I'm trying to get there. But what I can say is I have earned every damn one of my listeners that I have. They are loyal. They are amazing people. They are faithful because they have been through it.
Right.
They spread the word. The show is growing. At this point, I have listeners now in 48 countries.
Nice.
And like I said, I'm getting ready to drop episode 50 next week. If anybody is interested, that will be actually it's going to be my second Sandy Hook interview. Scarlett Lewis, we're going to obviously be talking about that day, but we're also going to be talking about a lot of the work that she's been doing with her foundation in the name of her son, Jesse, who she lost that day.
Yeah.
That's going to be an intense one, but that's going to be probably a better, more upbeat tone than Robbie Parker's episode was. But I definitely recommend, if you've ever been through grief, if you are in grief, if you know somebody who is, recommend that they give this show a try. And look, I understand it's not for everybody. So if it's not, that's okay. There's no hard feelings. But if you try, you think it's not for you, and you ever decide you want to come back, I'll be here when you're ready, because everybody needs someone to go through the grief journey with. And a lot of us don't even start it because we feel like we don't have anybody to. And you don't have to come on. When I say like talking to people, you don't know this. You don't have to come on the show and talk to me. You can come here and just listen. If you want to talk to me, then you go to my website. It's ourdeaddads.com. There is a Be a Guest form. You fill it out, and we're going to have a conversation from there, and we just might end up having an interview. But if you aren't up for having an interview, if it's not your cup of tea, but you still think that you can benefit from hearing how others have gotten through their grief, then I can't recommend enough that you give this a shot. And again, we're on all the platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Pandora, all of them. You just, or you can go right to the website. You can listen through there if you don't want to deal with the podcast, with the listening platform. You can listen to all the full episodes right from my website. This is something that I believe is so powerful and so necessary. And I know that a lot of people feel that it is too. But I also understand that a lot of people may have a little bit of a hard time listening to topics of grief every single week. Look, it's not a doom and gloom podcast. This isn't, all sad and depressing. We have a lot of fun on this show. Believe it or not, we do have a lot of fun. There's a lot of humor. Sometimes there's some dark humor. At the end of every episode, We play a little bit of a game. We do some rapid fire questions for the last 5 to 10 minutes just to learn some useless tidbits of information about everybody, things that have nothing to do with nothing to do with the story that we just talked about. We make it fun. We get the listeners engaged. We get the guests engaged. And we're trying to create community because community is so powerful and everybody needs someone, whether you know it or not.
Yep. And that's why we podcasters stick together too. Did I ever tell you this story about me, how I used to avoid the topic of grief and death?
I don't believe you did.
Well,
let's hear it.
Let me just tell you this. The listeners may have heard bits and pieces up here and there, but here's the entire story.
Okay.
My mother was the inveterate planner. She would plan everything down to the most minute detail. So she planned her funeral pretty much from the moment she was going to be dead. She planned everything, not just who the funeral home was, but who memorial funds could be donated to, how many bouquets of flowers and arrangements she wanted or didn't want, the type of flowers she didn't want even. And she had it down almost on an agenda format of what my brother and I were supposed to do.
I'm going to have a question for you after
Extremely detailed. All right, you hang on to that question for a minute. Not only did she do all this planning, but she felt the need to convey that information to her children.
Okay.
My brother lived out of state. I was the only one here. So I was kind of her caretaker. I watched over her and everything.
Yeah.
So about once a month, she would invite me over for dinner. My mother did not cook. She would invite me over for dinner, which meant I would come over, I would cook. And the topic of conversation was going to be these plans she had made. Maybe she made a revision here and there, or maybe she gave a copy to somebody else, whatever. I hated those dinners so much that I used to have an escape call planned. You know how when you have a blind date, you just about choked, didn't you, on your water, if that's water in there. I used to have an escape call planned. I used to have a good friend who would call me at a specific time because at my job, I had told my mother I was on call 24/7, which was kind of true. I worked at a nursing home, and sometimes there were emergencies that I had to go help with.
Right.
So I would have my friend call, and I would go, "Oh my gosh, no, really? What room or what patient or what resident?" And I would leave, and I would.
That's a good friend.
And it was because I didn't want to talk about this or listen to it because I was terrified of the entire concept of death and grief. That was what was really at the base of it. I don't know. I could not talk without losing control of my emotions completely. And I didn't want to crumble because of that. I didn't want to show that weakness. And then eventually I got a job at a hospice home. And the nurses kind of figured out I had this reservation, so to speak, about the topic. Yeah. And they developed a plan where they would start to ask my help with a patient. Now, every patient here in this hospice home is dying. You know, you never know if it's a day away or 3 days away. And they eventually would have me help them with hands-on care. And then at one point, they actually asked my help with a patient who was actively dying and did in fact die while I was in the room. Gradually, with the nurses helping me and supporting me, it got me over that. And that very hospice home is the one I was at when this entire concept of a podcast came to be. So I used to be terrified of it.
Are you still?
No, I talk about death every day now.
Oh, I know you do, but that doesn't mean that you're not still terrified.
No, I'm not terrified of it. I have my plans in place. I have written paperwork in a binder, and it's in the safe or file cabinet of my son-in-law. He's going to take care of things, and no, I'm good to go. But at the time, I just could not deal with it.
That makes sense. The question that I had for you before was, did your mother make these plans because she liked the idea of not having to make her kids crazy and planning, or was she a control freak?
She looked at this as a gift she was giving us by making all those plans, answering all those questions, because when my father died, she, of course, had to go through that at the funeral home. And she remembered very well how at the time, the last thing you want to do is make decisions about the obituary, make all of those decisions. So she was trying to spare us that stress. Now, I have to add that as kids, my brother and I, took great pleasure in changing one of her plans, but we did it for fun and we did it to honor her memory. But Anyway, we did make a change, and it was fine, I'm sure. But no, it was a gift. And she was right, because when the time came, all of those questions were already answered. We didn't have to worry about any of them. It was a gift.
So fun. It's so funny that your mom thought that she was giving you guys a gift. And I had suggested that with my dad to plan his funeral in advance. And he was completely against the idea. Because Kim and I moved to Texas in 2016, and then we moved here to Florida in 2022. Before we moved to Texas, I suggested multiple times to my dad, we need to get your funeral planned.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah.
That's so morbid. What the hell am I going to do that for?
Yeah.
I said, because you have 7 children, and none of us are going to agree on what to do. So this way, if it's done and you make all the decisions, then all we have to do is push the button and execute them.
Yep.
And it's your wishes. You get to make the decision. You are in total control.
Right.
And when I said it like that, he's like, yeah, you know what? That's a good idea. And so then he was on board. And then we went in. I think it was about 6 months before we moved. Got everything planned. And when the time came, all I had to do was call up the guy at the funeral home and said, it's time.
Yep.
In fact, the funeral home director, is going to be an upcoming guest on the podcast.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to talk about his any loss that he's had, but to talk about how his experience has been dealing with 10 years of this.
Oh, yeah.
With so many other families. Just came in and let Max.
Yeah.
So I threw that idea past him a few months ago. Like, would you be interested? And he's like, that would actually be really cool.
Yeah.
So we're going to do that. It's going to be a really interesting perspective, I think.
Yeah.
To see how that goes. Yeah, I'm excited.
It will. Well, look at that. Time has gotten away from us again. I swear, you and I, we could talk all afternoon.
We could talk for hours and hours and hours.
Who knows where the conversation would go? But for now, for today, we have to wrap things up and say farewell. So one more time, tell our listeners the name of your podcast, tell them how they can reach you, and know that the contact information will be in the podcast notes. And then I'll sign off.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me here. I really, really appreciate it. And I definitely look forward to the next time. I hope that you do not get sick of me, and I hope that there will be a next time and a next time.
I'm not going to get sick.
That's
too much fun to talk to.
I love that. So the name of the podcast, once again, is Our Dead Dads. If you go to look it up on any podcast platform, if you see what looks kind of like a retro-looking cartoonish logo with 2 ghosts, like an orange, circly, orange, yellowish, bluish background, just 2 ghosts. They have hats on and ties. They just look like old men. I mean, I really think the ghosts look like the Odd Couple with the hats and the ties and everything. If you find that logo, you found the right podcast. The website is ourdeaddads.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. I haven't done as much on YouTube. I'm getting there. But Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, those are the big ones right now. You can go to the website. All of the back episodes are up there. I'm not exactly sure when this is going to be released, but if it's before episode 50, then feel free to join. Find me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find my personal profile, Nick Gaylord. If you see a Nick Gaylord, that is the owner of Our Dead Dads podcast. You found the right one. Find Our Dead Dads podcast Facebook page and also the other social media pages. Join them and follow me. I do occasionally do lives. I try to do Facebook and TikTok lives at least twice a month on each one. So that's a great way to kind of network and to get a little bit of interaction with me. And again, if you'd like to be a guest, on ourdeaddads.com, go to contact us. There is a be a guest form. You can fill that out. If you'd like to recommend or nominate a guest, you can do that as well. Just know that you're not alone. Anything that you're feeling, no matter how intense, how unique you may think it is, like your situation may be unique, but you're far from the first person who's ever dealt with grief and far from the first person who ever wasn't sure of how to deal with it. Again, I went through this crap too. I didn't know what I was doing when my dad died. Even though it wasn't the first time I've been through it, but I also didn't know what I was doing, and I thought I was good. Realized I wasn't. It's a very common theme that you're going to hear from a lot of people.
Different every time.
This podcast, thinking they're good.
Every time. Yep.
It is different every single time, but the outcome is that we'll get through it together. It doesn't mean it's going to happen in one shot or one little conversation. It's a start. Is the hardest part of getting through grief and moving through grief.
That's right.
Is beginning. The first conversation. By the way, we're not saying move past it. We're not saying get past it or get around it. We're saying go through it. That's the only way. That's the only effective. It doesn't have to be a scary, negative situation. So I invite everybody to come check out Our Dead Dads podcast and tell your friends, tell anybody you want, because this is something that really is for everybody. Anybody who's ever had loss, experienced it, going through it now. By the way, we have also had a few conversations about anticipatory grief. People that they know that they're going to be losing somebody. We've had those conversations. So there's so much that we talk about. I really believe it's a show for everybody.
I always have a good time talking to you, even though we're talking about death. And some people aren't going to understand that, but I know others will. And I bet a week's paycheck that many of your listeners and my listeners will get that as well. When you find somebody that you can talk to comfortably about grief and about death, you're in a good space. You're in a safe space. So, absolutely. So, listeners, as we wrap up today,
you definitely feel like you're around your people.
I just want to say that my attempt today was to expand your resources, to give you another option, whether it's a different option or an additional option. Doesn't matter. That's up to you. Because what I truly want to happen is that you find what you need to help you move through your grief. And we talk about self-care a lot. I always close by reminding you to take care of yourselves. One of the ways you can take care of yourself is to find those supportive, comforting resources and people that you feel you can listen to, you can talk with. You can be a guest on his show. You can be a guest on my show. All you have to do is reach out. So think about that. Remember again to take care of yourselves. Check out Our Dead Dads podcast. I know you'll enjoy it. And certainly, please come back again next time as we all continue to live and grieve. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.